Yeah. Good afternoon, Milwaukee. This is the Mark Belling Late Afternoon Show on News Talk 1130 WISN. All of you who think you know better than me how to do my job. What would you talk about? What would you do? I know that you idiot. Don't press me today. Don't even just the normal stupid things that you say. Try to censor them for once in your life. This is not a day for people to be getting on other people's nerves. So for those of you who have a tendency to get on other people's nerves, and I always think pain in the butts know who they are. Do you think people who are pains in the butts know that they're pains in the butts? Oh, I don't agree with that. As someone who knows many pains in the butts and talks to other people who believes that those people are pains in the butts, we discuss this. We believe people who know are pains in the butts know they are pains in the butts. They just don't care. So for those of you who are pains in the butts, this is not the day for you to be pushing it. I understand everything that's going on out there. I understand that some people are just distraught about the results of yesterday's election. I understand that some people, it's more of a reaction of anger. There are other people, I've commented a lot about the stages of grief that you go into. They've immediately moved into the rationalizing and the bargaining part of the whole thing. There are some who are trying to figure out, well, I guess it really isn't that bad after all, and trying to convince themselves of that. People are in all different states of mind. I pity the people who work in workplaces where the majority of people are Democrats and where the person who is the Republican has been shooting off his mouth for a few months about how Obama was going to lose, because those people are being savage today. The I told you soing and the dancing on the graves that's going on from the lefties, this is just overwhelming. It's going on everywhere. Plus, there's the settling of all the bets. All the people who made, I bet Obama's going to lose, I bet Obama's going to win. All those bets have to be settled today. And they are never settled with any kind of good nature or good cheer. People are crabby out about this. Just on the freeway, I saw people driving too slowly, people honking. I know all of this. So I have a show to do, and I have a life to continue to lead. Even though Barack Obama is going to be the president of the United States for 4 more years. Suck on that one. 4 more years of this. What did he say last night? We know in our hearts the best is yet to come. Oh, is that what I'm afraid of? His best. We know what his best is. In other words, it's going to get better than Obamacare. It's going to get better than $16 trillion in the national debt. It's going to get better than $1.3 trillion annual deficits. It's going to get better than sucking up to the Russians. It's going to be better than Iran getting a bomb and nuking Israel off the planet. It's going to get better. And here's the thing. He means it. He means it. There are some positive aspects of this, and obviously they're dwarfed by the negative. And I have figured out how I'm going to do my program today. First thing I've understand, and in fact, I even advise. And I know that this sounds insular and it sounds self-focused and so on, but it's what I think. I honestly don't think you should watch anybody in the mainstream media today. I don't. You can maybe watch Fox. You can listen to shows like mine. There's no point in watching it. The people that have passed themselves off as objective showed that they were in the bag worse than they've ever been. Why reward them with your business? And why put up with having to listen to them right now talk about all the things that are wrong with conservatism, all the things that are wrong with the Republicans, all the reasons why Barack Obama is a saint? There's no reason to expose yourself to it. Paul says he hates the Brian Williamses and Diane Sawyers of the world. I'm telling you, don't watch them tonight. If you're somebody that normally watches, don't watch it. Why? Now, I'll admit, my newspaper column, which is out today, I had to write it before the election. So I obviously wasn't going to write about the results of the election, but I wanted something to be timely, and it focuses on this whole thing with the media as to why those of us, the about half the country, and maybe I got to admit slightly less than half the country, that isn't crazy, that cares about America and cares about our future, that half the country, and by the way, the election results are about 50 to 48, give or take. It's about a 2-point. The popular vote's still being counted. You know, when it ends, it's going to be about a 2-point win for Obama. That's obviously very, very close. It's obviously a deeply divided nation. Those 48% of us, you know, we're going to be told that we're supposed to shut up and go away, that we don't have any say in America, that we lost. We've got a mainstream media out there, which is just about everybody, then a handful of outlets, that is against us, that isn't fair to us, that doesn't report the news honestly. Why watch them? I'm serious about this. Why put up with it? I know that to get some stuff, you want to get the Packers news, well, where are you going to go? I understand. But by and large, there's no need to expose yourself to it, and it's just going to make you more hacked off, and the stuff that you're going to hear is going to be as inane as ever. This is a time to circle the wagons. A lot of lefties are under the, well, this is the end of you talk radio guys. It's the end of Fox News. It's the end of the conservatives. We liberals have won. This was the victory to end all victories. You guys are all done. You're all finished. Well, the reality is that we're not going to die. We're all still here. And I'll tell you something else. There isn't a conservative in America who is changing their mind about their philosophy as a result of this election. Every one of us is still here. We have the same brains that we've had before. We have the same morality and the same conscience that we've had before, and we aren't going to go anywhere. And if anything, it's going to make, I think, our audiences and our communities more loyal than they've ever been. Now, I don't know how the Republican Party is going to react to this. There's going to be a lot of finger pointing and a lot of anguishing and a lot of people who say you need to do this, you need to do that. You've got to do more to appeal to women. You got to do more to reach out to blacks. You've got to stop. You got to throw the Tea Party off the bus, etc. There's all of that stuff that's going to go on. I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about the politicians. I'm talking about the actual Americans who have points of view and thoughts and ideologies. Without regard to how the election turns out, doesn't change whether or not we're right or not. We are right. The next 4 years are going to prove it, just as the last 4 years proved it. Give us some good news, Mark. I know what people are saying. Well, I'll give you 3 pieces of good news. Try as they might, the most targeted member of Congress in America survived. Michelle Bachmann actually won in Minnesota. I was convinced she was going to go down. There isn't a single member of the Congress that they wanted to beat more badly than her. That district was targeted. They spent millions and millions of dollars on one House seat in Minnesota. What with Minnesota going for Obama, the signs were against Michelle surviving. She won. So, Michelle Bachmann's going to be around to keep stirring up trouble. Whether you like Michelle Bachmann or not, you certainly have to admit you like the fact that she's still going to be around. I know that's not much to hang your hat on. I say you said ask for some good news, that's up. Secondly, Governor Walker in Wisconsin is now stronger than ever. There weren't many Republican winners in the United States yesterday, but Scott Walker was probably the biggest. On a day in which the country went Democratic, the state of Wisconsin's legislature turned even more Republican. Control of the state Senate is back in Republican hands, and it's now going to be a 3-vote margin, 18-15. They picked up 2 seats. The third will be finalized with the Paul Farrow election next month. The state senator from Oshkosh, a Democrat, lost. And the up north district that had been represented by Holprin, the Republicans picked that up. So the state Senate flips back over to the Republicans, and the state assembly, I believe they gained one seat there. I'm not sure. The number is 60-39. I think it started 58-41. I might be off on that. Barring a recount or two, the Republicans now control the assembly 60-39, the Senate 18-15, with Governor Walker, of course, still firmly in charge of the governorship. That's your second piece of good news. Want your third piece of good news? Everything that happens from here on out, not our fault. This doesn't work out. If all the things that we fear are going to happen, not on my conscience. I doubt that it's on your conscience in there. Do you have a conscience? I don't think you have a conscience. I think you're a snake. I think you try to get away with whatever you can get away with. I think you're guilt-free. Oh, you never feel guilty about anything. Oh, you do? You have guilt in you? Paul said he's a white Catholic male with 2 teenage daughters. Yeah, the Catholics. Oh, does that religion have a problem? Does that religion have a problem? More than half the Catholics in the United States just flipping off their bishops in this election. Voting for their God over their religious freedom. Their God, of course, being Barack Obama. Now, I actually am going to try to do an organized show today. I wrote down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 16 key points that I wanted to address, or segments that I wanted to do. I intend to try to cover all of them. I want to tell you about a couple of things that we are going to do. I'm really intrigued at hearing what Senator Ron Johnson has to say. He was the guy that was elected in the last wave election, and this wasn't really a wave election. This was really the Democrats holding serve. What the Democrats did is maintain all of the power that they had prior to the election. They didn't really gain anything anywhere. But they did maintain, and that means their power continues for years to come. Ron Johnson was part of the election 2 years ago in which the Republicans retook a lot of power in this country. He went there obviously with the purpose of trying to fix the excesses of our nation, and this election here was an enormous setback. The Republicans in the Senate are going to be, and for that matter the House, are going to be forced now with deciding whether or not to try to moderate the positions of Obama and work with him to avert the disasters like sequestration. By the way, what percentage of Americans do you think know what that word sequestration means? Today. Maybe I better put, what percentage of Americans have even heard that word prior to today? Under 10%. By Thanksgiving Day, it's going to be 95. That is going to be the word the next 2 months. I want to hear what Senator Johnson has to say about his take and his approach to all of this and his own personal reaction. We're going to have him on at about 10 after 4. Everything that I say today is going to be an about. Also, as I said, there were some good things that happened, primarily in Wisconsin. The Republicans have now total control of state government. The only thing we don't have control of is Madison judges. The Republicans regained control of the state Senate and now have a 3-vote margin. The state Senate Republican leader, Scott Fitzgerald, is going to be with me. That's going to be right around 20-5. So those are two people that I want to talk to about all of this. Here's where I'm actually going to start now that the initial ranting and raving overture to the program is over. I want to start with the things that I was wrong about. And as I've explained many times, when I'm wrong about something in sports, I'm always very, very interested in what it is that happened. It makes a great impression on me because it's something that I didn't expect to happen. Throughout the history of the United States, presidential elections tend to be a reflection of the American economy. I thought this one would be. I was wrong. Generally speaking, when the economy stinks, the president loses. When the economy is fair or better, the president is reelected. There's almost no exception to this in American history. Even back in the 1800s, elections had a lot more to do with the status of the economy. And I realize we didn't have as much of a national economy then. It was much more localized, who was doing well on the train line and so on. But the American economy has always been the thing that most determined whether or not an incumbent president would be reelected. I assumed that that would be the major factor in this election. I clearly was wrong. That's the first major thing that I was wrong about in this election and in analyzing it. And as you know, I felt for a year. I really felt up until about Saturday of this past weekend that Obama was going to lose. It was the first thing that I was wrong about. The second thing that I was wrong about, I thought that Democratic enthusiasm was down, that Republicans would be motivated to vote in greater numbers than Democrats, that the magic of 2008 that led to these huge turnouts of Democratic voters, particularly young voters, black voters, etc., that wouldn't be replicated in the same numbers. One of the reasons why, even though almost all polls showed Obama winning, I had some confidence that Romney would win, is I felt that in the end, the Republicans who said they were going to vote were likelier to vote than the Democrats. This was clearly wrong. The Democratic voter turnout was very, very strong. The vote totals here in Wisconsin, overwhelmingly high. We had about 3 million people vote in this election. I didn't get any sense that you had the same fervor on the part of the Democrats. Everything that was out there, every indicator. Are you looking forward to the election? Way more Republicans than Democrats said yes. Just looking at the activity that you saw, I mean, all the commotion of 4 years ago, it wasn't there. The passion on the college campuses, it wasn't there. They managed to turn out the almost exact same numbers that they did in 2008. The Democratic voter participation was as strong in 2012 here as it was in 2008. I was wrong about that. I clearly misread that. I think I know why I misread it. I've been trying to figure out why I misread it, and I have a theory that I think I'll get to if I don't run out of time on today's show. Those are the two giant things that I was wrong about. I felt that the election would be a referendum on the economy. The economy stinks, therefore the incumbent loses. And I thought that there wasn't the same enthusiasm in 2012 with the supposed Messiah Obama as there was in 2008. That clearly was also wrong. Those two factors, more than anything else, led me to misread some of the things in this election. Here's the third thing I was wrong about. I totally misread the importance of some issues that Obama made a big deal about. It's almost shocking to me that I'm wrong about this, but I admit when I'm wrong, I'm wrong. This contraceptive care mandate issue, where Obama took on the Catholic Church, I thought was a mistake on his part. Clearly, it wasn't a mistake, and it helped him win the election. The reality is that we live in a country in which we've got at least some voters, almost entirely female, who right now care more about whether or not they can have their abortions and their birth control pills than they do about the economy of our country. It's just true. It's undeniable. The Obama campaign hammered this issue. They ran so many ads ripping the Republicans for saying they were going to cut off funding to Planned Parenthood. My thought was, whether you cut off funding to Planned Parenthood or not, is anybody actually going to cast their vote on that? Clearly people did. Clearly people did. Obama's campaign knew what they were doing in dealing with those small, piddly issues. My thought, and again, this is me fessing up. You'll never hear this from a liberal when they acknowledge. You never hear a liberal who, the liberals who all thought Scott Walker was going to lose the recall. They never explained that they were wrong about anything. I'm confident enough in my opinions. And also I'm open-minded enough to learn things. Learning a few things here about this country that we live in, and some of them aren't all that pleasant. I thought the reason he was carrying out of a Planned Parenthood and the contraceptive mandate and howling out Sandra Fluck and all of that stuff is because he couldn't run on his own record because his record was terrible. He had to invent something. After all, you got to run some TV commercials, and not everything can simply be demonizing of Mitt Romney. These seemingly trivial issues that were aimed at female voters, largely unmarried female voters, worked for Obama. It is staggering and almost sickening to think that there are some people in this country for whom it actually is an important issue as to whether or not they can get free contraceptives or not, and they'd base their vote for president on that. But you'll recall early on when the Catholic bishops lashed back at this and said that this was an assault on our religious freedom, that we are going to be required to pay for this when we find it to be immoral. The Obama people never backed down. They thought they had a winning issue on that. They pressed it all the way through. They even gave Sandra Fluck a key speaking role at their Democratic convention. Let's be honest, it worked. Those three things were big things. I overestimated the importance of the economy on the election. I underestimated the Democratic voter turnout, and I was wrong in thinking that Obama was making a mistake dealing with these piddly social issues. Those were three things I was wrong about. I believe I was wrong on nothing else. That's it. Now, those three things are huge. I think they turned the election, but that's where I got it wrong. Those three areas. There are a lot of other things that I think I was right about. And there's a lot of things that we've learned from these exit polls. And for that matter, a lot of things that we've learned about the polls themselves. Here's a staggering fact. Barack Obama got the support of 39% of white Americans. You think that we don't live in that we aren't as racially divided as ever? While white Americans are still the largest single group in this country, they don't control anything anymore in and of themselves. Obama was supported by 39% of whites, according to the exit polls. 39%. How'd he win? Because he got just about everybody who isn't white. Overwhelming percentages, well over 90% of blacks, and 71-27 with Hispanics. There are others, Asian Americans, and so on. The dominant group in our society, white Americans, voted rather overwhelmingly against the guy who leads the entire country. That's a rather sobering fact, but again, it's true. Given the fact that the polls and the exit polls were dead on the money in every one of these states, I think that the breakdown by individual group is telling. Here's one of the things that I was right about. I said I thought Tommy Thompson would run 1.5 points ahead of Mitt Romney. Since I thought both elections were very close, I thought even if Romney lost, Thompson would win. What I was wrong about was that the margin wasn't as close as I thought. Thompson actually ran 1.2 points ahead of Romney, but of course that wasn't anywhere near enough for him to win, given that Romney lost by a little over 6 points. I was right about the fact that nobody splits tickets anymore. You either voted for Democrats or you voted for Republicans. Happened all over America. In the states that voted for Obama for president, they by and large elected Democrats to the United States Senate. There were a couple of cases where Republicans, states that elected states that went for Romney did not elect a Republican senator. That has a lot to do with the stupidity of some of the things that those Republican Senate candidates say. If we can learn, if you Republicans that are running for office can take anything from this election, let's start with this. If you have odd thoughts about rape, keep your mouth shut. Every one of the candidates that put his foot in his mouth about rape lost. Murdoch, the Republican Senate candidate in Indiana, lost. Missouri, which otherwise was a wipeout win for the Republicans, Romney crushed Obama in Missouri. But the Republican Senate candidate, Aiken, the idiot down there, he lost. And that state assemblyman from northeastern Wisconsin, Roger Rivard, the guy who made his idiotic comments about rape, he lost in a very, very close election. The Republicans didn't need him much. They actually gained a couple of seats in the state assembly, but they lost his. So every one of the candidates that we know of that made an idiotic comment about rape lost. So, Paul, if you ever run for any office as a Republican, don't say anything about rape. Thank you. You've at least learned that. That is a good point. Why are they even talking about? The reason they're talking about rape is reporters ask them, why do you oppose abortion in cases of rape and incest? And they take that bait. And if you're kind of stupid, you start talking dumb, and here's what happens. And let's be honest about this. There are some people for whom that statement was more of a reason to vote in their election than the status of our economy. It's just true. Look at Missouri. Romney, you're looking for a few bright spots in America. Missouri used to be a swing state. It is now a Republican state. Romney smacked Obama in Missouri. But the Democrat won the Senate election because the Republican candidate was babbling about rape. All right, now I got my 16 things that I said I was going to cover. How many of those 16 do you think I'll actually get to? Paul says 12. These are they're all essential. Now, I mean, a few of them I've already alluded to, but I wanted to comment at greater depth about them. One of them I've already done. I did it in my tease, my survival kit about digging for burying myself. And if I was going to go take all my assets and hide out somewhere and get into self-preservation here and try to avoid the nuclear war and try to avoid the inflation that's going to erode the value of all of my money, where do you think I should go? I hear Montana is where a lot of those people actually do hold themselves up. We hear rumors that there's all sorts of people living underground in Montana, that they've been fearing this for some time. Montana is as off the grid as you could still be. I suppose that in northern Alaska, but that's just too cold. Yeah, Montana underground, that's off the grid. Down there and hoarding away with their hot plate that they're fueling off of some sort of diesel generator that they're powering with like biodiesel. They're like the rotted out corn that's probably. What am I talking about? All right, so I'm thinking better like the Cayman Islands. They have total banking secrecy. Take all of my assets down there. Put it all into gold and diamonds and maybe the Chinese yuan. As long as they're going to manipulate their currency, why don't I at least go on and manipulate it with them? And just hunker around down there until I get old and die. It means I'm giving up my career, I imagine, but... really, how can I do the show from down there and have any credibility? What do you know about what's going on? You're in a cave in the Cayman Islands. No, if you go down there, you're opting out for the remainder of life because you fear that the worst is to come. Nobody knows how bad it's going to be. I am not one of these idiots who's going to sugarcoat you. It'll be just fine. It won't. It won't be just fine. How bad it is, I think, depends on a lot of things. It actually depends a whole lot more on the 2014 elections than you would imagine. Obama can be neutered the end of his presidency. Most lame duck presidents are. Reagan didn't get anything done his second term. Almost everything of importance Reagan did was in his first 4 years. Reagan was neutered. Certainly W was neutered in his second 4 years. Even Clinton didn't do much of anything in his second 4-year term. You can neuter them, especially if they lose all of their power when they're repudiated in the final election. Now, some of the things that are in place are not reversible. But how bad it's going to be, that is still within the power of Americans. And if you want to hear a little bit of sunny side up stuff here, I think Barack Obama is more popular today than he will be at any day for the remainder of his presidency. I think his popularity will do nothing but go down from here on out. And if you want to test me on that, his approval rating, given the fact, the best test of a person's approval rating is how many people voted for him. He got about 50% of the vote. If you're wondering what 50% wins, it's a little over 50. Then Romney's right around 48. Then there's that scattering that goes to everybody else. He's right around 50 to 51%. I will tell you, I don't expect to see his approval rating this high again. Maybe I'm wrong about that. As I acknowledge, I've been wrong about a few things here. That's what I believe. And one of the reasons I believe this is that this time bomb of sequestration is coming. Stock market fell apart today. Everybody's already looked past the election. We now know. I should probably explain what sequestration is, given the fact that you're going to hear the word 85 trillion times between now and the end of the year. Paul said I should start by spelling it. See, at least we conservatives, when we lose, we're funny. Remember how just obnoxious the liberals were after the Walker thing? I mean, there's a lot of bitterness here, but at least if I'm going to be bitter and I'm going to be miserable, I'm at least going to find humor in my misery. I'm not one of these self-pitying, whiny-ass teachers all upset because I got to kick it a little bit more for my health insurance. I'm more concerned about the country than I am about the fact that he's going to jack my taxes out the wazoo. Well, life goes on sort of until we have no money and until the nuclear bombs fall all over the top of us and until all of our savings are eroded into nothing and until Bernanke with the beard buys up every last amount of American debt, making our dollar literally worthless. All of which I kind of think is going to happen. Did you say you think nuclear? I think something's going to happen with Iran very, very, very soon. I think we're either going to go to war with Iran or Iran's going to launch something. I think one of those two things is going to happen. Sequestration. I'll cover that in a minute. I'll get into all this stuff, including the sequestration. If you retain nothing from today's program other than the following sentence, let it be this. Just because the candidate you vote for loses an election doesn't mean you are wrong. Some people seem to think that it's like a contest. You pick the winner of a football game. You're not supposed to guess who's going to win. You vote according to your principles. And I will go to my grave thinking that America has made an outrageously awful decision. And I also know that to one degree or another, I'm going to be proven right about that. The degree to which that happens is still up for grabs. This doesn't have to be the end of America, as I said. There is the ability to neuter out his presidency. It happens to a lot of second-term presidents. I'm not going to tell you that it isn't going to be bad. It's going to be a lot worse than if he didn't win. Do understand that just because you vote for a candidate who didn't win didn't mean that you were wrong. People screw things up all the time. All right, now the forecast. Fox 6's Justin Zolich. When are you going to bring me a new weather? This is as old as the hills in here. You so despondent that you're not doing your job in there or what? What's going on with you? Huh? All right. This isn't that old. Mostly cloudy tonight, low 36. Tomorrow, a mix of sun and clouds. Actually should get over 50 for a high, 52. Very nice day for Friday, partly sunny and mild, 55. For the weekend, it's going to be warm before it gets cold. Saturday, mostly cloudy, windy, and warmer. There might be some light rain showers. Might make 60, though. For Veterans Day Sunday, showers likely. Thunderstorm possible, high 60. The holiday of Veterans Day is observed day is Monday. The actual day on the calendar is Sunday, by the way. This whole second term of Obama is going to start in his first term. You'll recall that a couple of years ago, when they were dealing with the debt ceiling, the Congress and the president swept everything under the rug until after the election. The process is called sequestration. Paul says I should spell it. S-E, I should spell it wrong, just so that everybody calls you up and then and then corrects me. I should deliberately spell it wrong just so you have to listen to all of those people. Wouldn't you rather hear from them than the liberal? Paul's got liberals calling him up and taunting him off the air. I knew that would. It's going to go on the entire hour. I know. Why are they throwing the F-bombs? You think they'd be happy, wouldn't you? They're unbelievable. They're unbelievable. They're swearing at you after they win. I mean, I'm telling you, they're weird people. You get to learn this. You didn't know how weird they were till you started doing this job. sequestration, sequestration. It calls for automatic across-the-board budget cuts. January 2nd is actually the date because January 1st is a holiday. January 2nd of next year, if the president and the Congress do not agree on a plan to reduce the federal budget deficit. Now remember, since January 2nd is the date, this is the Congress of right now. Congress of right now is pretty much the same Congress as next year. Very little change because of yesterday's election. But it has to be done before the end of the year. In the final presidential debate, you'll recall that Obama said we're going to address it, which was news to everyone because I don't think many people think they are going to address it. It means that the Republicans in the House and the president are going to have to reach a deal on deficit reduction before the end of the year. Sequestration has the financial markets freaked because the cuts would be across the board. That would mean major slashes in defense spending. It would mean cutting. They would have to cut all sorts of discretionary programs. There wouldn't be any literal, well, let's not cut this one, instead cut that one. Many defense contractors have sent off layoff notices to their employees. You'll recall that Obama was telling them not to do it, even though by law they had to do it. In other words, they're going to have to reach a deal on deficit reduction in the next 2 months. Now, many people believe that the Republicans will be open to tax increases if they are accompanied by actual real cuts in spending. Will Obama cut spending? I doubt it. I think sequestration is 50-50, that it could happen. The financial markets believe that that would be a nightmare. And that's one of the reasons that the stock market is already plummeting today. So in any event, Obama's going to have to deal with this right away. Let's talk about some things now from the election. One of the big fallouts of this is that Republicans are being lectured that they have to address their gender gap. The exit polls show women went for Obama 55-44. When the exit pollsters quizzed women about the issues that were important to them, there are a lot different issues than were responded to by most men. The Obama campaign made the decision early on, and I alluded to this earlier in the hour, to focus on several issues that seemed trivial. They doubled down on the contraceptive mandate. They made it a major issue. It was in their radio advertising. They gave Sandra Fluck the major role at the convention. It was in the direct mail pieces. They even focused again and again and again on the issue of legal abortion, saying that if Romney got in, Roe versus Wade would be threatened. This is, I admit, a problem for the Republicans. What do you want the Republicans supposedly to do to close the gender gap? Suddenly come out in favor of all of this stuff? Do you want them to repudiate their stance on life? Do you want the Republican Party to lobotomize itself and actually say we ought to force every employer to give free contraceptives to their workers? I don't believe you can play that game. If some women in America are going to vote like idiots, I don't believe the answer is to take on idiotic positions that they like. You still, in the end, have to do what you believe in. Exit polls show that Catholics broke for Obama, despite the fact that you had bishops all over the country suggesting that it was a terrible sin to vote for him. Despite the fact that the Roman Catholic Church's religious freedom has been assaulted by the contraceptive mandate. By the way, it's still possible that thing could be overturned by the Supreme Court. The Catholics are suing. I don't know how the Republican Party reverses female attitudes on an issue if members of their own religion aren't going to listen to their church on this. Politicians can't say stuff like this, but I can. Just because some voters are going to be vapid, and because they think it's an important issue as to whether or not they're guaranteed the right to have free birth control, doesn't mean that a political party in a nation that already has a $16 trillion federal deficit, that is facing a rebirth of terror, a nuclear Iran, Obamacare that isn't going to be able to afford to pay for needed medical care, much less somebody's diaphragm, should change its position on this. The Republicans are going to have to figure out how to win in these elections without pandering to some voters, largely female, who vote like idiots. Again, that's just reality. The next thing that I want to go to on the election, Paul, I'm going to get to all 16 of my things. I think I'm being very disciplined today. I am. I might pop somebody between now and the end of the program in here. You know, if, the only person available for me to pop is you because Wyatt's in another building. I know, so I can't pop him. Paul said I could punch the microphone out. I've had a million questions today as to how this could have happened in a country that went one way in 2010. How did Wisconsin vote just this past summer for the mirror opposite of Barack Obama and Scott Walker? It's simple. I mentioned it on yesterday's program, but it's undeniably true. I've looked at the numbers everywhere. The people who didn't vote in 2010 in Wisconsin and nationally and who didn't vote in the recall election this summer voted in this election. Mitt Romney got a handful more votes than Scott Walker did in this summer's recall. But Barack Obama got hundreds of thousands of more votes than Tom Barrett got. The same thing happened nationally. I think in the 2010 election across the country, Republicans deeply concerned about the direction of their country turned out in enormous numbers. We saw that in Wisconsin, and then we saw them here in Wisconsin turn out again in massive numbers to save Governor Walker. The Democrats didn't. The casual voting Democrats did not show up in those numbers. They resurfaced in this election. I think very few people voted for Scott Walker and Barack Obama. Clearly, some did. In fact, the exit poll in Wisconsin is revealing. The exit poll of voters who voted for Obama showed Walker with a favorability rating of 52.46. That bodes very well for him being reelected in 2014. Still, I think what you had here is that the Republicans maxed out their support in 2010 and again here in the summer of 2012, such an incredibly strong turnout. These casual voters, some of whom are racial minorities who don't vote in big numbers in other elections, the Democrats do get them out in presidential elections. I think it's fair to say for the next number of years, the Republicans are going to do better in the off-year elections and the Democrats are going to do better in the presidential years. that actually is better news than you think. Our people care enough to vote all the time. Theirs care enough to vote only every 4 years. Paul says it's hard to imagine a Republican in the White House. Au contraire. Why did the Democratic numbers explode again here in 2012, as they did in 2008? When so many of us seem to see the lack of enthusiasm. I have an answer to that as well. I am telling you, I got an answer to everything today. You want to hear that answer? Belling late afternoon show. Given the fact that I was wrong about this, and I didn't expect that, the pollsters, you got to give them credit, they were right. They were polling anywhere between 5 to 12% more Democrats than Republicans. And many people thought that that model was wrong because they didn't think that the Democratic turnout would be that much higher. They didn't think it would be like 2008. I believe that black voters came through again for President Obama. I looked at some of these congressional districts. The number of votes in overwhelmingly black congressional districts around the country was dramatically higher here in 12 than it was in 10. Gwen Moore's district, for example, tremendous increase in the number of votes in 12 as compared to 10. I wonder if there would have been the same turnout for a radical lefty Democrat who wasn't black. I clearly think that there is a major pride factor for black Americans among Obama being president, and he turned out an overwhelming black vote here. I think that was a tremendous asset for him. You take a look at some of the states that the Romney campaign's internal polls showed them winning. Virginia, large black population. North Carolina was closer than they thought that it was going to be. Pennsylvania, Michigan, they thought that those might have been winnable. Overwhelming margins in predominantly black areas there, I think, lifted Obama over the top. I don't know that the Democrats would always be able to count on that. You clearly, though, had in the last two elections a large number of voters vote in 2008 and in 2012 who hardly ever vote or were voting for the first time. And that, I think, did help propel Obama, and it explains why such a larger percentage of self-identified Democrats than Republicans voted in the election, even though there wasn't a drop-off in Republican participation. You want to know what United States Senator Ron Johnson thinks about all of this? He'll be with me in the next segment, coming up on News Talk 1130 WISN. Standing up for Milwaukee, this is the Mark Belling Late Afternoon Show on News Talk 1130 WISN. Of all the people in Wisconsin politics whose reaction to yesterday's election I thought would be interesting, Wisconsin Senator Ron Johnson is number one on the list, and we're joined by him right now. Senator, good afternoon.
Well, Mark, how you doing?
Well, that's not the best question today. You, unlike most of your colleagues, were never involved in politics until you ran for the Senate 2 years ago. You're not one of these people, elections come and go, you win some, you lose some. You've been stepping on the accelerator since you've been there. You want to get things done. You want to change things. And here we have this election result, which seems to ratify everything you're opposed to. Are you discouraged by this? What's your reaction to the results?
Yeah, I'm obviously disappointed because, certainly as I was traveling around the state, the case I was making, this election was, nothing short of about saving America. And, the real shame here is it's going to be incredibly difficult now for us to stop the implementation of the health care law, which, will destroy our health care system and apply to bankrupt this nation. But Mark, I'll tell you, I haven't thrown in the towel. I mean, I am not about ready to quit. And now it's just a matter of, figuring out a different strategy on what we actually can do. And from my standpoint, the strategy really starts and almost ends with information. The problem we had, and you were talking about earlier, we had 2.2 million voters in my election, 2.5 in Scott's, and 3 million in this election. And that 500,000 voters is always concerning me. Those individuals that weren't engaged enough to get out there and vote in the recall, by and large, I don't believe are engaged enough in the process to be informed to really understand what's at stake in this election. And so it's about, from my standpoint, informing Americans, informing the voters of Wisconsin. And here's the problem that Harry Reid and President Obama are going to have is they could win an election in demagoguery. They could win an election saying, well, we can solve the problems by just making the rich pay their fair share and a balanced approach to deficit reduction. Well, that's all well and good to say that. It's just not possible. The most robust tax the rich scheme on part of Democrats raises $34 billion, and that's probably optimistic when we're running a $1,090 billion a year deficit. And, of course, balanced approach to deficit reduction, I'm all for that as well. We need more revenue, but we need to do it by growing our economy. And it's also true, sequestration, all the gnashing of teeth over a $1.2 billion or $1.2 trillion spending reduction over 10 years. The grand bargain is supposed to be $3 trillion of spending reduction. I mean, who's going to come up with that number on the Democrat side? When's Harry Reid going to pass a budget? So all of a sudden, these guys, because they won, are going to be forced to govern. They're going to be forced to put a plan on the table. And I haven't seen that plan. No American has. It'll be interesting to see what they put on the table.
Well, you are right. The ball is literally in their court now, and the things that they've shoved into the future, they actually have to deal with now. And part of that is going to be the sequestration that comes up right away. What should the approach of conservative Republicans like yourself be? Are you open to discussing tax increases with them if they actually propose real cuts in spending? Is your position to stand your ground entirely? How do you think they should be dealt with? Because they are going to need the support of some Republicans, especially in the House, to do anything. But you are right. For the first time since Obama has been in, they will be required to address some of this stuff because of these triggers that are coming in.
First of all, Mark, I've never seen a Democrat put real spending restraint on the table. I've never seen it. I've seen it in theory. I've heard $3 of spending cuts for $1 revenue, but that's just talk. And I think the way you approach this is you lay out the facts and figures. Mark, if we want more revenue, the way to do it is to get our economy just an average economy. Basically extracts 18.1% of revenue from the economy. We're at 15% right now. If you just revert to that 18%, that's $500 billion. I mean, that's the way to get revenue. Get rid of the uncertainty in the economy by scaring the heck out of business owners and consumers.
Let me ask you about a couple of the things that happened in the election. There were two Republican candidates who came from the Tea Party type movement as you did, one in Indiana and the other in Missouri, and they both torpedoed their campaigns by saying incredibly stupid things about rape, and they did so in states that the Republicans should have won the election. Is that is that frustrating to you that states that Republican senators should be winning, they end up losing because some people don't know enough as to what not to say in a campaign, and you end up losing votes when you've got so much of this things that have to do with the future of our country at stake here? Just your thoughts on that.
Well, yes, it's enormously frustrating. And Mark, it's the difference between somebody coming from business and career politicians. If you're running a business and you've got a key position, you don't place an ad, a classified ad, and then kind of just select the best of three people. You proactively go and recruit excellence. We don't do that in the political realm. So as a result, we get the same old political career politicians that quite honestly are not particularly good candidates. We need to proactively recruit patriots, good candidates, and then we need to train them and give them the tools as well as an agenda and strategy that they can run. We really give our candidates no help whatsoever. I certainly saw that. I had to hire my own research people and everything else to ferret out the facts and figures and come up with my own agenda. The conservatives ought to have a strategy that we can all tap into, that we can all agree on. And by the way, it'd be far more coordinated. We could break through the communication barrier because, let's face it, the media is not going to help us. We got to do this on our own, together with talk radio.
The exit polls show that a lot of female voters felt very strongly about the contraceptive mandate. A lot of those social issues, they were concerned Romney would roll back the clock on abortion. This is very frustrating to a lot of us that some people would vote on issues like that at a time in which Obamacare is ready to be implemented. We have a massive debt. the notion is the Republican Party has to now start speaking to those voters. Well, short of pandering, how do you speak to some voters that are so selfish, so trivial, that the free contraceptives is something that would guide their vote for president?
Well, same answer, information. It's another example. Again, no Republicans really raising this as an issue is forced on people by the media, but you have to understand how to respond to it. And, we just need to, we have to get the information out there that, I don't know of any Republicans that are looking to deny any woman contraception. I actually would prefer being part of the party that's actually pro-life as opposed to pro-abortion. I think there's a way of sensitively talking about that and letting people understand that, we do realize that other people have other views. And, we just basically said, this is what we believe. We understand what you believe. And what would be the reality of, actually having the abortion issue decided based on a democratic process as opposed to being imposed on us by the courts? There's ways to intelligently talk about those issues that shouldn't scare the other side because, in the end, the priorities facing this nation have nothing to do with the social issues. It's the fact that we're bankrupting this country, and we are turning America into a country that we will not recognize in 4 years if we don't turn this around.
How can you turn it around if Obama's in the White House and the Democrats have the Senate? How do you do this?
Well, from my standpoint, what I'm pressing my colleagues for is doing the exact same thing I pressed them for the day after I was sworn in is take a look at the fact that we own the House or that we control the House. We have to utilize the House in a strategic fashion to, in a very visible way, pass the pieces of legislation that the American people support that starts solving the problem. For the life of me, Mark, I have no idea why the House did not pass, for example, permitting the Keystone XL pipeline as a standalone bill. But, these politicians are so rooted in the way they've done things in the past, they just got to put that, tack that onto a transportation bill or something else that has no chance of passage. Be smart about these things. And, it's one thing. I'm not giving our side a whole lot of brains for smart too often.
Has this election result deadened at all your enthusiasm to try to work within the system as a member of the Senate as opposed to just the private citizen that you were before?
No, Mark, because in the end, it's a political process. I mean, we have to do it through Washington. Unfortunately, until we whittle Washington down to the size it really ought to be, until we limit government's influence in our lives, we're going to have to deal with that government. And, so that's why I did get involved here. But somebody earlier asked me, what do you tell people that are just throwing up their hands and quitting? I tell them, come to me or come with me to Walter Reed or Bethesda or Arlington and take a look at the sacrifice that the finest among us have made for our freedom. And that's what I hope people understand, that we can't give up on this country. This is a precious nation. We're going down the wrong path. We're blowing it. But I'm certainly not going to give up, Mark, and I'm begging nobody on our side to give up. We just got to double down and work harder, get more intelligent, provide more information to people, do it in a powerful way, and that's how we. In the end, you got to inform, you got to persuade, you got to win the argument.
Thanks for joining us, Senator.
Thanks a lot, Mark. Keep up the good work.
Wisconsin Senator Ron Johnson. Well, that was very, very strong stuff from him. That he's not going to do not give up on America, that he's visited the veterans and the veteran hospitals and so on who've made far greater sacrifices, and this is why you can't give up, why you have to press on, although obviously this election result of yesterday is an enormous setback. For those of you just tuning in, I said there were a lot of things that I wanted to deal with regard to the election, and we will have a time here for telephone calls on today's program, probably in the 5 o'clock hour. But there's a lot of things that I want to cover because so much comes into this. I thought Mitt Romney ran a campaign that we could all be proud of if you're a conservative. But it may now be time to accept that that isn't enough. The campaign of Obama was nothing but one pound shot after another, after another, after another. You go back and take a look at his political ads starting from about May of this year right through the election. None of them were positive. None of them spoke of his record. None of them dealt with his accomplishments. None of them dealt with his approach to balancing the federal budget. They were almost all savage attacks on Mitt Romney. Once Romney got the Republican nomination, it was all this stuff about Bain, this focusing on layoffs of companies that he ran, exaggeration and distortion of his positions. It was just one shameless rip after another. Now let's go to the debates, where I felt Romney conducted himself wonderfully. He was a remarkably informed, eloquent gentleman. He looked like a leader. He looked like the kind of president that we would want to have. And whether it was his listless performance in debate number 1 or his sneering attacks in 2 and 3, all Obama did was rip and be dismissive. The vice presidential debate, Paul Ryan came on respectful, polite, informed, and earnest. Joe Biden acted like a jackass. Well, look who won. Some of you may not want to hear this. I was hoping Romney could win the presidency by running the right way. Well, guess what? It didn't happen. In retrospect, Obama should have been hit harder. The tone should have been more personal. It would have been unpleasant and the country wouldn't have liked it. The country keeps saying, we hate the negative ads, we hate the negative ads, we hate the negative ads. Well, they just voted for the guy who ran the more negative campaign. Not once was he called a socialist by any Republican in any Republican ad. Well, that's what he is. For fear of creating a backlash, the Republicans weren't, quote, mean enough. Again, I'm dealing with reality here as to why what ought to have been a winning message didn't work. How a guy with this miserable track record could get away with blaming it all on his predecessor who hasn't been in office for 4 years, and then take an American citizen who has impeccable credentials. Mitt Romney's one of the more decent guys in our country, a guy that they couldn't find a hint of personal scandal anywhere in his life, and turn him into this monster they were portraying him as, and how they managed to pull it all off. Now, I don't know if being harshly negative on Obama would have worked or not. What I do know is that not going that route didn't work. I thought down the stretch Romney was on top of his game. I thought that he was a guy that looked like a leader and looked like a president. But for too many people, he had already been too negatively portrayed. The die had been set that he's this rich, fat cat who gets off on laying people off, because that's what Obama kept saying in all these sleazy ads. There are some arguments you can't win. You're not going to win the pander game. You're not going to win by trying to outpromise free contraceptives. You're not going to win by all of the stuff that the Democrats are going to espouse, which is stupid government and stupid policy. But when it comes to the tactics, being good and decent and honorable and nice may not work anymore. Lee Atwater was vilified. Remember him? He ran the campaign of the first Bush back in 1988. I'll admit, they brutalized Michael Dukakis. They won. To this day, Democrats hate Lee Atwater, who's now been dead for better than 15 years. No Democrats hated anybody who ran Mitt Romney's campaign. They weren't criticizing the hatchet strategies of anybody involved in the Republican campaign because Romney tried to run this campaign and win as a decent, strong leader. It's the way he wanted to run it. It's because that's what he was. And his campaign decided to play to who Mitt Romney was, and they decided that they weren't going to run something contrary to what Mitt Romney was. They weren't going to run an indecent, slimy David Axelrod Chicago campaign. The slime worked. Chicago won. Again, I'm just dealing in reality here. Now, there was one huge flaw in the Romney campaign. And it was something that I think they in the end probably couldn't correct. It's the same one that I was whining about all the way through 2011. And you'll recall that in 2011, I was kind of pounding the table that Mitt Romney was the wrong guy. He won a lot of us over with his general decency and his willingness to run on conservative principles throughout 2012. But in the end, the greatest weapon the Republicans had was left on the table, and that was because of who the candidate was. Every exit poll that was taken shows that Obamacare remains unpopular. This election should have been made a referendum on Obamacare. Do you want the government running your health care? Do you want to lose your health insurance? You could have even exaggerated what it did, given what the other side was pulling. Do you want to lose your own doctor? Do you want to see health care rationing? Do you want to have the 9-month waits for operations like they have in England? Do you want to see American businesses lay off employees like crazy to stay underneath the threshold so that they're not covered by Obamacare? The reason they couldn't do this is because Mitt Romney was the wrong guy to attack Obamacare because the plan he put in place in Massachusetts was very, very similar. It was probably the best argument when you have the exit polls in an election in which the majority voted for Obama, in which majorities still say that they oppose Obamacare. That means there are people who voted for Obama who oppose Obamacare. It was an enormous missed opportunity. The most important issue of Obama's presidency is an unpopular one. Obamacare was unpopular when it was passed. It's unpopular today. The only way to have stopped it was to defeat Obama. Yet that didn't happen. They'll write books about what a missed opportunity that was. This is probably the least popular major public policy ever enacted in American history. And I think it was an enormous missed opportunity by the Republicans. I mentioned on yesterday's program, if there was one flaw that I saw in the Romney campaign, it was that he failed to make this a referendum on Obamacare. And seeing those exit poll results state by state that showed marginal opposition to it, and if you think the opposition is bad now, wait until we have it. By the way, you'll never be able to get rid of it. Once we have it and all the employers drop their group health plans and we're all dependent on the government for our health care, it's going to grow and expand like every other social program we've ever had. It's here and it's here to stay. The lefties, you guys are all whining about all of this. Well, the mess that you guys want is now here. There's no way any of it's going to work. There's no way you're going to be able to pay for any of it. And there's no way you're going to be able to tax us enough to come close to being able to do so. As I said, there are some bright spots in all of this. Here in Wisconsin, you have right now, perhaps, the strongest Republican dominance of government of any one of the swing states in the country. And yesterday, almost every battleground state went to the Democrats. But in Wisconsin, in state government, the Republicans actually expanded their power. The Republicans now retook control of the state Senate. They'll have a 3-vote margin. They expanded their enormous grip on the state assembly. and they are in position to implement the second half of Scott Walker's reforms. We're going to be talking about that next on News Talk 1130 WISN. News Talk 1130 WISN. Mark Belling, late afternoon show. Forecast Fox 6's Justin Zolich. Mostly cloudy tonight, low 36. It'll also be dark. As will the next 4 years. Bleak days ahead in America. Tomorrow, mix of sun and clouds, high 52. Friday, partly sunny and mild, high 55. Saturday, mostly cloudy, windy and warmer. Chance of light rain showers, high around 60 degrees. As I mentioned, it isn't all terrible news. Even though you had, all over America, a lot of straight party ticket voting, and an election that was won by the Democrats, albeit narrowly. This wasn't like 2010, where Republicans crushed in everything. You would have expected Democratic gains pretty much across the board in state legislatures and so on. In Wisconsin, the congressional delegation remained the same. The two new Republican members of Congress elected back in 10, Ribble in northeastern Wisconsin and Duffy in northern Wisconsin, they both were reelected easily. The fears that some people had about Paul Ryan having trouble in his congressional race here in southeastern Wisconsin, he came home rather easily. Even better news was in the Wisconsin state legislature. The Republicans actually picked up a couple of seats in the state assembly. They now have an astonishingly wide 60-39 margin in the assembly, and they regained control of the state Senate, which they had lost for a few months. They picked up two separate seats that had been held by Democrats. Way up in northern Wisconsin, Jim Holprin, a Democrat, chose not to run for re-election. Tom Tiffany won that seat big. And in the Oshkosh-Fond du Lac area, Jessica King, who won a recall election against the Republican senator back in 2011, she was defeated in a very close election yesterday. So the Republicans picked up those two seats in the state Senate, and they're going to hold an 18-15 majority there. That means for the next 2 years at least, Governor Walker will have a wide Republican control of the Assembly and a solid Republican control of the state Senate. To talk about that, we're joined right now by the leader of the Republicans in the state Senate, Scott Fitzgerald. Scott, good afternoon.
Hey, Mark. Good to be with you.
On a day in which there was so much bad news for Republicans and conservatives, your thoughts on how the Republican candidates in the state legislature were able to hold up so well and actually kind of run against the tide and gain a couple of seats?
Well, I think there was a couple of different things that were working in our favor. One was that we were able to recruit really solid, good candidates for the November elections. And you got to remember, we were trying to pull all this together just before the June 5th recall election. So we did a good job, I have to say, and I think the Democrats did a horrible job. There was no place throughout the entire state in which Mark Miller and the Democrats were on offense. So that allowed us to really pick 5 seats throughout the state to really go after them. And the ones that really were Republican-leaning after redistricting was the 18th Senate seat, the Oshkosh-Fond du Lac seat, and the 30th in Green Bay, in which John Mako came up short, but the 12th, the other one you referred to, Tom Tiffany. So I think we just once again kind of positioned ourselves very well. And last night, it was hard to get anybody to really pay attention to us. I was in Pewaukee and at Tommy's party along with all the results from the presidential, and yeah, we were the bright spot, but it was kind of lost in the shuffle.
Yeah, and the reason it's lost in the shuffle is obviously everybody knows the importance of the national election. They know the importance of the United States Senate election, but right behind the status of our country for people in Wisconsin is our government. And the last 2 years we've actually shown the nation how to get out from underneath the terrible problems that we're facing. What we've done in Wisconsin because of Governor Walker and you Republicans in the state legislature. And to see now after 2 years of here in Wisconsin an attempt to throw all of you out of power through recalls and everything else, and then these elections to have that power 2 years later be as strong, if not stronger than ever, I think certainly has to be an endorsement of the reforms that you pursued and the opportunity now to build on them.
Yeah, and that's why moving forward, I think the governor's budget that he'll introduce sometime in February, I mean, I think our two top priorities have to once again be make sure it's balanced, make sure there's no structural deficit. I think it verifies kind of what we've been working on, and that the reforms that are in place are the right direction. And if we can do that budget, and because we will be able to now, retaking control in the Senate and obviously the Assembly in control, I think that's going to say a lot about, what Governor Walker and the Republican legislature has done.
The first question, you now seem to have the ability to pass a mining bill. I don't know if there's still a company that wants to do any mining in Wisconsin, but one did not pass last year because the one Republican, Dale Schultz, was opposed to the bill. Are you more optimistic now that with an 18-15 majority, you may be able to pass mining legislation?
Yeah, I am. I mean, there's almost no one that will argue that current statute is just so onerous and over the top in shutting down that industry that it shouldn't be revisited. Now, will that version be the exact same version of the bill that passed the Assembly and came up one vote short in the Senate? I don't think so. I think there probably will be some changes to it, but there's no doubt in my mind that we will, over this next biennium, be able to pass a mining bill that will open the door to that industry, hopefully locating here at some point.
Obviously, Wisconsin is subject to what happens in the national economy, and there's fears that things could be really miserable now with Obama being reelected, and that does affect the state budget. Nonetheless, do you believe that there will be an opportunity to try to further lower the tax burden in the next budget with Governor Walker proposing some type of tax cuts?
Yeah, the best thing that I've seen, really, and something that we watch closely, are those forecasts on income tax collections. And if you go back to March, you're going to see that is creating this surplus that's been growing, and it will, by January, look to be somewhere in excess of $1 billion. And I think not only is the governor talking about some type of income tax cut, but I find a lot of my colleagues talking about that as well. I mean, we've got to continue to come up with ideas that are going to stimulate the economy here and create this job growth that we're hurting so bad for right now, especially in light manufacturing. And I think that income tax cut can be part of that. The venture capital stuff may be part of that package. And then finally, you just alluded to it. I mean, the big question mark right now is what is going to happen with Medicaid, Medicare, and what type of bill is going to be laid at our feet in this biennium. That's kind of the big question mark that's out there right now.
None of the Democrats who left the state last year and they're running off to Illinois and hiding lost their jobs as a result of this, but power was lost. Probably Holprin would have lost had he not chosen to run for re-election. The end result of this, though, I think was that the Democratic tactic in which they tried to stop Governor Walker's program and make the Republicans pay for this. Here you are 2 years later, you've got an 18-15 margin, which was, I think that's what was it, 18-15 or 19-14 when all of this was going on?
19, yeah.
Yeah, they have absolutely nothing to show for the whole thing, despite the fact that they ran recall elections all over the place. And now we had a national election in which their side won. They still weren't able to make a dent in all of this. I just think that they completely misplayed this, and the election results have shown that.
Yeah, I think there's two things. Well, first and foremost, our base has never been energized, despite what happened at the national level last night. I mean, I have never seen victory centers like those that are just constantly abuzz with people really committed on the phones, making the calls, putting the signs, doing all the stuff that, I remember in the late 90s, we struggled to get that type of volunteer action. But it's really the recalls have energized our base. I still believe that. And the second piece is we did lose a couple of great senators, and Van Wanggaard did nothing more than vote for Act 10. He did nothing wrong, and we lost him, and hopefully we'll get him back in 2 years from now or whenever that election happens. I just think that, everything that Mark Miller and the Democrats did, leaving the state, the tantrums that have been thrown on the floor, catering to the protesters at the Capitol, really being bankrupt, I think, on ideas related to economic development or job creation. I mean, I think that that's starting to show, and I think people are starting to grasp that. And as a result of that, they have a hard time mounting a really serious campaign. And we had a couple races that were much closer than I even thought they would be last night. And because of that, I think we're on the right track. We're on the right track right now.
Now, the Senate Democrats have announced, or Mark Miller has announced, he's not going to be the Senate Democratic leader in the next 2 years, so they've thrown him over the bus. Do you think they've learned something, and there might be an attempt to have a more moderate leadership on their side, or the 15 of them that are left, are they so far to the left that they don't have the ability to moderate themselves? I mean, I think if they do nothing but try to obstruct Governor Walker and lose, all that's going to happen is Scott's going to be reelected in 2 years, and the Republicans are going to maintain their strength in the legislature, and Wisconsin will continue to be the model of what happens under Republican governance. I don't know that they grasp that, but they're, getting rid of Mark Miller now means that they must realize that they got to change something.
Yeah, and the rumor on the Capitol is that, the two senators that seem to be competing for it now is Senator Erpenbach and Senator Larson. I'm telling you, I mean, if they pick Senator Larson at this point, they have absolutely jumped off the cliff. You won't find anybody as a freshman as partisan and certainly as far to the left as what you find with Senator Larson. John Erpenbach is somebody that I have gotten to know, and I can have a decent conversation with John, and you can rely on what he says. But I think you're right. I mean, I think that, right now they're struggling to figure out who they are, and that's great for us.
They're like the only Democratic body in America that lost ground yesterday. You'd think that it might dawn on them the impact of all of that. And a final question, it's kind of a personal question. For the first time in ages, your brother is not in government. Jeff Fitzgerald, the former Assembly Speaker, of course, ran for the United States Senate, didn't run for re-election. Do you want to clue us in on what Jeff's plans are, or does he not share this stuff with you?
No, I think Jeff's kind of talked to the governor's people, and there might be something in the administration. But beyond that, I think he's kind of catching his breath right now, and we'll see where that leads.
Okay, thanks for joining us, Scott.
Thanks, Mark.
Republican State Senator Scott Fitzgerald, Senate Republican leader. The Republicans actually regained control of the state Senate, and as I said, if it sounds like I'm grasping for straws, looking for bright spots here, it is a bright spot. It is a major issue, control of Wisconsin government. That's something that we spend at least as much time on my program talking about, and the people here care about what happens in our own state as the national landscape. And for the Republicans to gain power yesterday in an election in which otherwise the Democrats had the advantage in anything, that is a profound statement, I think, of support for Walker and Republican members of the state legislature. One other point on that before I move on here. The exit polls in yesterday's election showed 52-46 approval for Walker. Yet we know that in the governor's election in 2 years, a lot of those people who voted yesterday won't vote. The numbers, 3 million people voted yesterday. In the recall election this past summer, 2.5 million. When Walker won in 2010, 2.2 million. Probably 2014, you're going to be back to that 2.2 million, which again will be a largely Republican voting bloc. Yet Walker's popular even among those hundreds of thousands, when the survey includes those hundreds of thousands of people who show up only to vote for Barack Obama. The strength of the Wisconsin state government revolution is certainly a bright spot in an otherwise very depressing period here in our country. Paul, I said I'd get through my 16 points, and I also said that we'd take calls. Let me see here. Wisconsin story, Assembly and Senate. Well, we just covered that. Midwest, didn't say a word about it. This will be worse than you think. Don't want to do that. I don't want to depress people. This will be worse than you think. Polls were right. Well, the polls were right. I think I've just covered that, right? The polls were right. The polls were right, and I was skeptical that some of those polls may have been wrong when they were polling so many more Democrats than Republicans. They were right about that. People have asked me, how did Romney do as well among independents and still lose? Well, there's more Democrats than there are Republicans. Most people who are independent vote for Republicans. That's the answer. When the Democrats get all of their people out, though, they're hard to beat, and that's what happened here yesterday. Chris Christie. He's on the list. Benghazi might have helped Obama. I'm giving you a few of the thoughts that I have, some of which are outside the box. Well, that's tied into the Chris Christie. I wonder, did Barack Obama benefit from betraying the Americans in Benghazi and lying about it? News Talk 1130 WISN. Mark Belling, late afternoon. Don't go anywhere. You're going to need this money. You're going to need this money desperately. In about half a minute here, I'm going to give you the key word to text in the iHeart cash contest that we have going on this period, which is the Fall Windfall Cash Contest. I give it to you right now, but we haven't yet reached the point. I don't want anybody to text in too early. You'll have until 5:15 to do it. Paul, what kind of a delay are we on right now? How many seconds? Okay, so I can do it right now. We're right now crossing right over the 5 o'clock hour. So you need to text the following word in to 36500. The word is, we've used this word before. Well, I'm sure that maybe they're running out of words. Tree. I don't know. Tree. T-R-E-E. Tree. Text tree to 36500 between now and 5:15. You'll get a confirmation back via text that they got your keyword. And sometime right around 5:15 our time, somebody's going to be drawn nationally for $1,000 and entered into the grand prize drawing for $50,000. So today's Fall Windfall Cash Contest word is tree. Text tree to 36500. Now this. Nobody has made this point, and I admit I might be wrong about it. In following the polls, you may recall that the Marquette Law School poll here in Wisconsin, the one that came out 2 weeks prior to the election, showed a remarkable move toward Obama. The poll that Marquette Law took out 3 weeks earlier was the one that showed that Romney had gotten to within a point of Obama. That was the one that was taken after debate number 1. Romney had the strong debate. In the Marquette Law poll of Wisconsin only, Romney came to within 1. And then this poll comes out showing Obama pulled it back to 8. That was the one with 2 weeks prior to the election. That poll came out before Hurricane Sandy. Just before, but before. The Marquette Law School poll was absolutely dead on accurate all the way through the Walker recall. I questioned its accuracy here in the presidential election because it didn't make any sense to me that Romney would be that far behind in Wisconsin when he seemed to be showing momentum in the preceding poll. Now, the final Marquette Law poll notched up a little bit, and they ended up nailing the thing right on the head. Obama won by about 6.5, 7 points in Wisconsin, which was what the Marquette Law poll said, meaning you've got to give Franklin credit here. The Marquette Law poll was correct. Something happened between the Romney bump of debate number 1 and then the period 2 weeks before the election. And again, this was before Hurricane Sandy, so that's not it. This is sad, almost terrifying and sickening to consider. Nonetheless, I wonder if there aren't some Americans who are glad Obama didn't do anything about Benghazi. So many of us that were appalled that we could have a terror attack on our embassy and not fight back. That we could lie to the American public and tell them, no, it's not a terror group. It's a protest over a stupid movie. That we could have Americans on the ground begging for air power. That we could have laser coordinates zoned in, but we didn't send in any air power. Could it be that there are so many Americans so terrified that we're going to be involved in another war? That we're going to be picking another fight with Al-Qaeda? That we'll be inflaming Libya? That they were glad Obama sat there and did nothing and let those people die? Is that possible? I think there are some Americans who are in such denial about the threat of terror and so weary of being involved in any kind of conflict, I wonder if some of them might not be secretly glad that Obama sat on his hands and let that happen. It's the only real news event that occurred in that period between debate number 1 and that last Marquette University Law School poll. I think one of the hidden issues in the election was people just don't want another war, and they're fearful that Romney's going to do something to confront somebody over there. Now, these people are terribly wrong. American weakness leads to nothing but problems, and it means we will face even more trouble in the future. Furthermore, there is going to be a war. As much as people don't want to hear it, if we don't attack Iran first, Iran will attack Israel, and nuclear weapons will be involved, and that will force us to get involved. Obama himself has said he will not, under his watch, allow Iran to get nuclear weapons. The only way I can think of to stop that outside of revolution within Iran is to go to war with them. It's going to happen one way or another. It may happen with us dealing from a position of weakness rather than strength. I wonder how many Americans who won't admit it are glad that Obama left well enough alone and let those Americans die, and are glad that he came out and told that cockamamie lie about a video on YouTube because they want to pretend that Al-Qaeda and terrorism aren't back. I have no shame at all in acknowledging that many of my fellow Americans are terribly misguided and wrong. You think I'm going to shrink away like a receding violet because Romney lost the election? Oh, our side wrong about everything. We have a large group in our country that think the government exists for the sole purpose for those of us who are productive to carry them along all the way, who think that we have no responsibility for peace and justice in the world, that think that our soldiers are nothing but a bunch of patsies to be killed. I don't think they're a majority, but they're a portion of those that voted for the president. And one of the reasons I am going to stand strong against those suggesting that the lesson the Republicans have to learn from this is to wimp out and become more moderate is because it means sacrificing every principle that one can believe in. Now, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the country was horrified by the handling of Libya. But the reality is, I don't think Obama paid any political price for Benghazi at all. Do you? Do you think it hurt him in the election at all? Well, Paulson agrees with it. It seems to have helped him. Now, Paulson, who would have thought that? I now wonder. I do believe this. And as sure as I'm sitting here, you watch this. The media that's been ignoring the Benghazi story, they're going after it now. This is all going to come out, and he's going to look terrible now that we can't do anything about it. And some people who may have been averting their eyes to the reality of the appeasement that occurred on that night in Benghazi and the lying that they then did about it, they may have to confront just how debased the whole thing was. But I really wonder if there aren't a lot of people who are relieved that Obama let those Americans die and aren't relieved that he lied about it in an attempt to pretend that we don't have terrorists gunning for us again. What are you referring to her being drunk about? Is there something I don't know about, or is that just... I don't know anything about this. Paul said there's some flap over Diane Sawyer supposedly being drunk on the air. There is no way I would know this, because why would I be watching Diane Sawyer doing election coverage? In fact, I'm encouraging all of you, except when you have to do it to watch sports, to avoid the mainstream media now like a plague. You can get most of the information elsewhere. When I say mainstream media, you know what I mean. CBS, NBC, ABC, some of the CNN and all of that stuff. There are enough sites out there that you can get information. I know it's a little bit hard to get local news without the Sentinel Journal at all, but screw them. They've decided to screw you. They decided to bias up their coverage of the entire election. They treat you as if you don't matter. They flip off half their audience. So, why give them your support? Time for us to depend and rely upon one another here. I need to take a break, as you might have guessed. By the way, this might be ugly, but in the next hour of the program, the audience gets to talk about the election. Standing up for Milwaukee, this is the Mark Belling Late Afternoon Show on News Talk 1130 WISN. Fire extinguisher out of here, Paul. Rome seems to be burning around me here. Barack Nero sitting there fiddling away. They're all happy and dancing in Chicago. They're all elated. Over what? Well, they got everything they wanted, and none of it is going to work, and none of it is working. For those of you just coming in, I made the decision on today's program, instead of just whining and complaining, to try to offer some insight onto what I think has happened here, to not sugarcoat how bad I think it is, to find the handful of things in yesterday's election results that are positive, to talk about the future, and to also offer some analysis. We did have Senator Ron Johnson and Senator Scott Fitzgerald on the program in the last hour, for those of you who want to go back after the program is over and listen to the podcast. We're going to take telephone calls on the election here, and I'm just going to throw it out. What you'd like to comment on, and it's going to be up to Paul just try to make sure we want good insights. I'm only giving the audience 1 hour to weigh in here, and I don't want a lot to have people really repetitive on the same point either. So fire away and have at it. Your chance is this hour to react to the election results. 414-799-1130 is the phone number. The miracle-homes.com toll-free line is 1-800-838-9476. I said I had this magic list of 16 points that I thought were really important to make, and I've covered quite a few of them. I want to start the hour with this one, the storm and Chris Christie. Paul asked the question of me late in the last hour, do I think the hurricane had any effect, and did it help Obama? Yes, I do think it had an effect. I think it helped Obama, but I don't think it's the reason he won. Certainly, there was momentum in almost all polls toward Romney that stopped the moment that storm hit. In the end, though, I don't think the fact that it rained on the East Coast made people suddenly decide that they wanted to vote for Obamacare and social liberalism. I do think, however, for those people that want to see people work together, Obama did get a giant benefit from fat Chris Christie licking his face up and carrying on like a happy little puppy that the president is there to help his precious little New Jersey. I think it mattered. Here's a Republican that's known as a hatchet man, praising and praising and praising and praising and praising the president. I think that had an impact on some people. Do I think it had anything to do with the election turning? No, but I think it had an impact. As you know, I thought the election would be very, very close. It was close, but it wasn't very, very close. I thought there'd be recounts. Really, that isn't the case. I think the margin, which did surprise me, that the storm did play a small impact on that. As for Christie, there was no need for him to fall all over himself as he did it. He did it because of his own selfish reasons. He knew that it would help him in New Jersey, and he also knows now that when the disaster assistance starts flowing, Obama's going to give a fortune to New Jersey. There will be payback for Christie there. A lot of people say that they like this. Christie has ambitions maybe to run for president in 2016. Probably this will be forgotten by most voters, just as people forgot the many betrayals of Newt Gingrich when he ran for president. It will not be forgotten by me. Chris Christie as a potential president is now dead to me. There was a way for him to have handled this without deliberately aiding Barack Obama's campaign for president. Here's the next thing I want to get to, and after that we'll go to calls. How you doing on the calls in there, Paul? Paul says he's fine. You're not getting people that are driving you crazy. Hey, if those lefties want to come on and taunt, let them. You think I'm going to fall apart? You think I can't take it? I live on the east side, for crying out loud. I thought this was striking. The vote margins in Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Iowa were almost identical. 3 Midwestern states that have a lot in common. Every one of them, the Obama win was between 5 and 7 points. It was like the exact same result in all 3 states. You'd think that there would be some difference, but there wasn't. Wisconsin and Minnesota have a lot in common. Urban area, suburban area, rural area. Although Wisconsin has more recently had more success electing Republicans than has Minnesota. Minnesota's elected Republicans in the past. I thought that Romney had the same success in each state, but just not quite enough to get over the hump in any of them, which leads to this point. Well, I think these results are terrible. And while the electoral vote doesn't seem all that close, the reality is that this is going to turn out to be about a 2% election. We're very, very close to having the majority of the country on our side, but we're clearly not there. Understand, they voted for socialism. You can call it whatever you want. Barack Obama has governed as a socialist. Obamacare, the dismantling of any kind of new coal plants in this country, refusal to ship in Canadian oil into the United States, redistribution of wealth, massive tax increases on high-income people, having the government get involved and own automobile companies and brag about it. And by the way, the auto bailout really helped Obama. A lot of us thought 2 years ago that that was an unpopular thing. It really helped him. The government literally buying a car company at a massive loss. If that isn't socialism, please tell me what is. Government controlling the means of production is what socialism is. The American public did vote for socialism, but it's not like it was a wipeout. We were very, very close. If about 1.5 out of every 100 Americans had changed their mind, Romney wins. It's a 2-point margin, I know, but you got to take the 1 vote off of Obama and add it to Romney. It's a swing of 2 votes. It's like when you play the Bears in the division game. By the way, how about them Packers? Let's go to the phones. Andrew in Wauwatosa, you're on News Talk 1130 WISN.
Hi, Mark. I just wanted to comment that I feel like despite what you said about how close the race was, we might really be moving to a point where at least half the country is okay with us being a handout entitlement society. That's the feel I got last night.
I did a long segment on that on yesterday's program.
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
No, that's fine, because whenever somebody calls up and agrees with me, I'm fine with that. No, I was saying I did a long segment on that. I agree with you on this. This is a major tipping point in society where when you have virtually as many, if not as many people dependent on government as those that are actually funding government, it becomes almost a point of no return. And that's the thing that's frightening about ever turning this thing around, as we've seen in Spain, Greece, really all the socialist nations of Europe. Once the dole is created, people are panicked at the notion of not being on the dole, to the point that you literally had votes swayed over people, fearful that the dole wouldn't cover their free contraceptives. This is what it's come to. And the fear that I have with Obamacare is, since most of us will be getting our health care from the government, because I believe most private companies will drop their group health plans. Now that's something that we're, quote, getting from the government, and they'll always threaten the Republicans are going to try to cut our health care. The same game they play with the senior citizens on Social Security and Medicare. By the way, this is the first election in my memory that the Democrats didn't try scare tactics on Medicare. They couldn't do it because they lost that argument. Paul Ryan said they'd win that argument. The Republicans did win it. The Democrats merely moved on to other things and managed to make that work. But yes, you're right. When you've got people carrying on about the Obama phones, when you've got as many people now on extended unemployment benefits as there are, you would think that having 47 million Americans on food stamps would be something that would harm Obama. Instead, many of those people that are getting the food stamps, they're fearful that somebody's going to take it away from them. They're going to vote for the guy that's giving it all to them. In a weird way, Obama wasn't as badly hurt by the terrible economy as I thought he would be, because with the economy so bad, it's made more people dependent upon government programs. And once they're on that dole, they tend to vote for the candidates that will perpetuate the dole. That's the really, really scary thing here, that when you've got a country in which such a small, fewer than half the people pay any income taxes of note, and so many people are on the dole, that people are going to keep voting for the dole. Now, in the end, it's the same as Europe. They vote for something that can't continue. We end up running out of money, and the dole they were voting for dries up because there's no money to support it. This is what they're doing is they're farting away all of the government money that they expect to get for their future. There isn't going to be any. We've got a $16 trillion national debt. But yeah, they voted for it. They voted for that, and that's the frightening thing when you've got all these people thinking about redistribution and trying to get their hands on the money of people who own businesses and people who are wealthy, and that'll solve all of our problems, and give me my free this and give me my free that. When we become a nation of takers rather than a nation of individuals responsible for themselves, when we're a nation full of single women who want other people to pay for their contraceptives and whine and cry and complain when they don't, when you have people turn against their own religion and support a government that orders a religion to abandon its religious views to instead hand away for free something it considers to be immoral, those are all the results of people being addicted to the dole and voting against what is clearly right and voting in favor instead of just getting all the free crap they can get. That was a very, very long answer to your point, but I agree with you about it.
It's as if Mitt was right on the money with his 47%.
He didn't state it well, but there's truth to the concept. The thing that he's wrong about is that the entire 47% isn't a lost cause. Some in that 47% voted for him. We all know many lower income people who get some government programs who understand that, the fact that they get some government programs doesn't mean that we can have a government that spends more money than it takes in. There are also a lot of people in the 47% who don't want to stay there, who want to rise up and who believe in the American dream. They're there, but a big chunk of that 47% is a lost cause. He didn't state it well, and he wasn't right about it, but there is, as you say some truth to it. Thank you for the call. He's right about that, and it's terrifying for the future because what with Obamacare coming in, if you consider the health care we'll all be getting from the government, and I don't have any, I expect I'll be in one of the health care exchanges in 2 or 3 years. I think virtually every company is going to drop their health plans. Why wouldn't they? Pay the fine, turn it over to government, and then we can all wait 17 weeks for an appointment to see our doctor. And as we all become dependent on the government for our health care, it's one more thing that the Democrats can say the Republicans will take away from us. When you have a country in which half the people don't pay really any taxes to speak of, but receive a lot from government, you create, it was a long time in coming, but you create a debacle like the one we had yesterday. It's one thing for Obama to have won the first time when so many people didn't realize he was going to be a radical. After governing as a radical, having it all fail, and then be reelected. That's what makes this so much worse. But for people who think that that means that we conservatives have to change our point of view and that the Republican Party has to moderate itself and, becoming part of the problem isn't the answer. Changing your views to win an election if you're not going to fix the problem, what really is the point? I think I've made some outstanding points on today's show, don't you? I am very eloquent. Not only that, very incisive. I haven't gotten through all of the 16 in here, though. I got to get to more calls, though. I said I would. I have to. John in Dousman, you're on News Talk 1130 WISN.
Yeah, the problem we have is...
Isn't Dousman the frog-jumping capital of the world or something?
What?
Isn't
Dousman? Yeah. It's a bullfrog jumping capital of the world.
That's what I thought. See, I know that. I worked that into this otherwise somber program. I insist on entertaining the audience even amidst all of this misery. Go ahead, John. Oh, it's the bullfrog jumping capital of the world. Not just the frog. It's the bullfrog jumping capital.
The problem is Romney didn't take the gloves off. He should have just slammed them. The problem is that the Republican Party is still too ethical. We got to get down and dirty at their level. We got to fight. And people aren't getting out there. We aren't motivated as they are. And we have to really get out there and battle.
Hang on. The first part, Paul's griping at you saying hindsight's 20/20. Well, that's true, Paul. Hindsight is 20/20, but hindsight is how we learn. And I agree with him. I think, in retrospect, that the Romney campaign wasn't filthy enough. And I hate to use that word, but that's what I mean. I think Romney tried to win it in a way that he could be proud of the campaign he ran, and I think a lot of Republicans were proud of the decency with which he conducted himself, how he remained focused on the issues, how he expressed himself so well, how he stayed so positive toward the end of the campaign, whereas Obama's just coming up and making up all these lies about Bain and trashing Romney and implying that he's this despicable human being. I think in retrospect, you should have come out for a year and called Obama a socialist. You should have said he was destroying our country. You should have said that Obamacare was something that was an anti-American program. I would not have thought that, though, because, and I admit that I was wrong about a few things. I would have thought the sheer rottenness of the economy was enough to beat him, that you could be like Reagan was against Carter, run, criticize the other opponent, but conduct yourself as a decent human being and as a president and win. And clearly that isn't the case, that you've got to be willing to get down there and play as obnoxious and vicious as they do, because it clearly worked. Barack Obama spent no time in his campaign defending anything he did for 4 years. All he did was trash Mitt Romney and run around and create more promises of goodies, free contraceptives, free health care, free this, free that. I'll keep making sure that Planned Parenthood keeps getting all that money so you can all keep having all the abortions you want. We'll pay for that with the government. That's what his campaign was. That's what it was. And I agree with you that one of the lessons to be learned from this is that Lee Atwater back in 1988, when he ran that hard-hitting campaign for the first Bush, was right. You got to smack him around and be obnoxious and filthy and almost indefensible in order to win. Evidently, that is the way that you win in America anymore, because running as a decent, and I think Romney ran as a decent human being. Guess what? It didn't work.
But you got to call people what they are. You got to just say, hey, if Baldwin's a lesbian, she's a lesbian. You can just say, hey, this is what you're voting for.
Well, that goes to the next of my 16 points. Do you think that one person in Wisconsin cared that Tammy Baldwin is gay?
I do.
Yeah, well, you voted against her anyway. Do you think it cost her one vote?
Yeah, I think it. Well, yeah,
no, it didn't.
Anyway.
No, it
but
didn't.
The thing is it's
hang on. No, it didn't.
What it's going to
hang on,
people.
John, are you listening?
Yeah, I'm listening.
I was making a point here about this because I'm trying to cover one of my 16 points in your call. Well, I'll just got to listen myself. Here's another thing that happened. Being gay is no longer any kind of detriment in American politics. Now, maybe it shouldn't be. And I'm not sure it would work for a Republican. But I don't think Tammy Baldwin lost any support because she is gay. Now, maybe that's a good step that we've moved forward in America. I think, if anything, it helped her because it attracted all of that national money to elect her. Now, everybody knows she's not the first gay member of the United States Senate. She's the first openly gay member of the United States Senate, and for a lot of gays, that meant something. But homosexuality, one's sexual preference, no longer matters. In fact, a person who is gay who philanders gets in no trouble, but a person who is married who philanders gets in all sorts of trouble. I think for some candidates, being gay may be an asset. If you cheat on your partner and you're gay, is that anywhere near the kind of big deal that if you cheat on your spouse and if you're straight and you cheat on your spouse and you're gay? You know what I'm saying? And I think Tammy's election might point to that. So I think whatever stigma there was over homosexuality is completely gone. Now, it may well be that among Republicans, there may be some Republicans who wouldn't vote for a gay candidate in a Republican primary. But in a general election, I don't think it mattered at all. I did predict, wasn't right about a lot of things, but I was right about this. I said Tommy would run about 1.5 points better than Romney. It actually was 1.2% better than Romney, slightly enough. I thought that might be enough to put Tommy over the top, even if Romney didn't win. The Romney loss is too much. I think Tammy Baldwin benefited greatly from running in the same year there was a presidential election when all of these Democrats who didn't vote, as was the case 2 years ago, were out there to vote for her. I also thought Tommy Thompson ended his political career with dignity last night, but dignity hasn't mattered for a whole lot here. What Tammy Baldwin did to Tommy Thompson and his reputation, implying that this is some sort of a sleazy guy, whether you like Tommy or not, this has been a tireless cheerleader for Wisconsin who has conducted himself wonderfully throughout his entire public life. When he was a governor, he was a revolutionary governor who set the tone for the nation. He was always somebody who was proud of his state, Wisconsin. When he went to Washington as HHS Secretary under President Bush, he was, according to most people, one of the greatest people ever in that position. Then he goes out and gets involved in business in his 60s so his family might finally have some money after he spent his entire year making $110,000 as governor, a little bit of money in his law practice in El Rey. Yeah, he went out and he tried to make some money for his family in the end. Didn't do a single thing that anyone has ever said was wrong in the process. And she goes out and trashes him and runs all these pictures with his hair all cockeyed and all over the face, making him look like he's a drunken buffoon and a bore. He deserved better than that too. But as I said, as the caller pointed out, running obnoxious, miserable campaigns like this, completely destroying the reputation of your opponent, evidently that's the way to go. Trust me, you'll learn from things you're wrong about. In fact, I learn more from the things I'm wrong about than the things that I'm right about, because when I think something and it turns out not to be true, it makes a greater impression on me. I've said that all along with sports teams. If I think a team isn't going to be any good, but they are, I really take note of it. I know. Tommy's campaign aide sends out an actual video of Tammy dancing with a bunch of goofs in drag. That's terrible. She runs around, however, and makes up a bunch of lies about him. Well, that's smart campaigning. Gag me. Now, I'm through 12 of the 16 points, and I want to get to more calls. Let me take a break. 540 News Talk 1130 WISN. She's right about that. Nobody listened to me when I mentioned that 2 or 3 weeks ago. The election this spring, the Roggensack election, is vital. If she loses, the Walker governorship may be rendered irrelevant. The Liberals would then gain a 4-3 majority on the court. That state Supreme Court election in April is absolutely vital. We have another election. Oh, don't worry. It's 5 months away. Huge. One of the conservative justices I'm glad Vicki's talking about that tomorrow, and I'm not stealing her topic here. I'm encouraging you to listen. One of the 4 conservative justices on the court is up for re-election this coming spring. The presidential turnout in Wisconsin yesterday was 70% of voting age residents, higher than 2008. Why? Both parties turned out their people. More Republicans voted for Romney than McCain, and Obama got his people out again from 2008. That's as I said, one of the miscalculations I made in assessing the election, as I didn't think there'd be the same Democratic vote in 12 as there was in 2008. There was. And I think a big portion of that was black voters getting out to support President Obama. And I don't know that they would have done that for a president of the exact same policies who was white. I think that there was a lot of pride with regard to blacks in wanting to have a black president reelected. That's my explanation of it, at least. For those of you who've been following my prediction for the entire year in which I thought that Obama would lose, you may have noticed that I changed my tone on Monday and Tuesday. I wasn't going to back off the prediction, but you clearly could tell I had no confidence or optimism on Monday and Tuesday's program. The one thing that I was looking for was the thing you always see in these campaigns, which is a bump in the polls the last 2 days. When a challenger beats an incumbent, they always move in the polls right before the election. And Romney didn't have that move. Romney's move was 3 weeks ago, and it stalled. And we see from the exit polls, the people who made up their mind at the last minute almost all broke for Obama. It was a failure of Romney to close the deal. There will be a lot of second guessing as to how he ran his campaign, and I know why he ran it the way that he ran it. But let's go back to that Republican convention. It was so touchy-feely, they never talked about conservative principles. They ran away from talking about conservative principles. They ran away from specifics on the issues because they thought that this would turn off people. Well, instead, it allowed the Democrats to portray conservative principles as something that they weren't. Ron Johnson made this point when we talked to him in the 4 o'clock hour. You've got to talk about these issues, and you've got to talk about how your approach is better for some of these people who right now are voting because they think there's no difference, so they're going to vote for the guy who gives them the free contraceptives. To Charlie in Farmington, you're on News Talk 1130 WISN.
Hey, Mark, I'm just shocked that so many people, 51% of the nation, is okay with Obamacare, as blatantly unconstitutional as it is. I'm shocked.
Especially since we don't have it yet. It's one thing once you're addicted to a government program, but Romney never made it an issue. And I know why he didn't make it an issue, because he had his own problem with the fact that he invented a lot of the ideas that he had. But when you see exit polls showing public opposition to the major program of the guy who won, that means you missed an enormous opportunity. Obamacare, of all the things that happened here, there's going to be a war with Iran. That would have been the case with regard to whether Romney won or Obama won. The $16 trillion deficit, it was there, and it was going to have to be dealt with regard to who it was. It's going to be one. It's going to be dealt worse with by Obama, but it was there. The one thing that would have changed was Obamacare. If Romney had won, it would have been gone. With Obama winning, it is there, and it is going to be disastrous financially for our country. It will drive people out of business. It will be terrible for the practice of medicine, and it will be much worse for the quality of life for people in the United States. However bad people think this part of Obama will be, it will be worse. We will, 15 years from now, if we're around, look back on what we had in health care in this country and what Barack Obama gave us. And we will rue the day we made the decision to go ahead with that because a bunch of bimbos wanted to get their free contraceptives. And it sounds like I'm bringing that contraceptive thing up a lot. The fact that was so hammered in on the exit polls among some of the young female voters who voted for Obama as being a key issue, for that to be a key issue for anything just shows, just render yourself a trivial twerp. Well, I got my free birth control from Obama. It's like the person yelling about, I got the free Obama phone, I got the free this, I got the free that. So we're left figuring out how to pay for this when we're already $16 trillion in the hole. Thank you for the call. So the Republicans are supposed to change their message to suddenly warm up to that group of people that wants all these freebies? There's no point in it. We have to try to win the argument. If we become as vapid as they are, if we bend over backwards to appeal to voters who couldn't care less about whether or not terrorists are going to take over the world, who couldn't care less about whether or not we are bankrupted, who couldn't care less about whether or not we're going to have to default on our bonds, who couldn't care less if the Federal Reserve is going to have to buy every last dollar of debt out there because there are no other buyers. You're saying a lot of your fellow Americans are idiots. I am. I'm also saying there's an enormous group of us, and I guess we're in the slight minority, who aren't. The good thing is that the only time they seem to have enough people to beat us in an election is when they all turn out in the presidential elections. They don't all turn out in the other ones. You got to figure out a way to win the presidential thing. Southside and Mike, you're on News Talk 1130 WISN.
Yeah, Mark, it's a sad day for America. I think a lot of the election went the way it went because of individual selfishness, ignorance, and racism. And I say racism because of the failed policies and all the excuses and lies that Obama came up with second time around were accepted by people. Those were excuses and lies that you wouldn't take from a 9-year-old. And a lot of ignorance as to what these programs, all these programs that sound nice initially and on paper, what they're really going to cost us in monetary value and freedom of the individual.
Well, and you're right on all of that, and that was all very well spoken. And the thing is that all these things that they think that they're voting for, they're not going to be able to get any of them when we tap ourselves out of money. And the sequestration thing is going to be the first shock of that. I mentioned it earlier in the program. Sequestration will have to occur before, January 2nd of next year. That is massive across-the-board budget cuts, which, by the way, are only still a tinkle into cutting into the annual deficits. But it's going to mean major layoffs at defense contractors, major cuts in social programs, unless he cuts a deal with the Republicans to avert it. And I don't think that's very likely, because I don't think that the Republicans are just going to roll over and bend over and give the president whatever he wants in order to avoid that. Thank you for the call. You made very, very good points. Let me get also to the list. Look for school districts to put all the tax increases on the ballot in presidential elections. It was a good day to pass school tax increases. See, you get all these lefties out to vote. West Bend finally passed their school tax increase. Cudahy passed one. Both the town and village of Grafton passed measures to spend above their legally allowed taxing limit. East Troy said no to a school tax increase, and so did Palmyra Eagle. Kudos to them. Most of the local tax increases passed, not all of them. Anybody dumb enough, those of you in West Bend, anybody dumb enough to vote for a tax increase before the Obama monsters are coming in at the end of the year, you're out of your minds. I want to make sure that there's nothing left here. I want to get to the Heritage Letter. News Talk 1130 WISN, Mark Belling, late afternoon show. From the Heritage Foundation, probably the leading conservative think tank in America, one of the two at least. 3 points they want to make. 1, establishment hand-wringing. They write, 2 weeks ago, we warned that Republican elders would immediately direct their ire at conservatives who pushed the party to embrace policy solutions and rhetoric that the establishment would contend alienated a majority of the electorate. We won't back down. 2, demographic election. President Obama turned out his base, and many will be tempted to play demographic politics. They will urge concessions on everything from abortion to amnesty. Conservatives cannot allow that to happen. 3, Obamacare. President Obama's biggest domestic policy achievement could have been his Achilles heel. Exit polls suggest a majority of voters in Ohio, Iowa, New Hampshire, and Colorado want Obamacare revealed, yet the states went for the president. That from the Heritage Foundation. Excellent points they make. Next. Very interesting results in that Republican state Senate election in Waukesha County, where the 2 Republicans ran against one another. Paul Farrell beat Chris Kapiga. I talked to people from both campaigns today. They find it bizarre that 40,000 voters in that district didn't vote in that race. If you combine the votes that were cast for other offices in that district, 40,000 short in the state Senate election. I don't know if it's because it was on the backside of the ballot in many places, or if people were unfamiliar with the candidate. In any event, Farrow did win, meaning Kapiga will stay in the state assembly. Farrow does have to run in a special election next month, but I don't believe there's even a Democrat on the ballot on it. That will push the Republicans back to 18-15 control of the state Senate. To Tony in Oka Creek, you're on News Talk 1130 WISN.
Hi, Mark. Thanks for taking the call. In reference to when you said that Romney was running a respected and safe election, and when you...
safe is probably not the right word, but it was a respectful, decent election in which he was an eloquent presidential type figure, and he certainly wasn't a gutter campaign. That's what I was saying, and I think running more of a gutter campaign in retrospect would have helped.
Okay. Yeah, in reference to that, I don't think that he was really talking about the risky issues of corruption in the administration as a whole, of Planned Parenthood, not drilling, the Fed. When he talks about that he left it all in the field, I don't know if he went deep enough into the things that people needed to hear. He just didn't talk about the true issues.
I think they talked about the economy without talking about why Obama made the economy the way it is. I think they danced around the fact that Obama was a radical because they thought that the American public would be turned off by that. Well, clearly the American public wasn't turned off by Obama taking a decent guy like Mitt Romney and turning him into the Antichrist. I mean, the fact of the matter is that one guy ran this campaign in the gutter and he's the guy that won. And that lesson, I think, can't be lost. Thanks for the call.